The day started like any other on the trail. I had been hiking solo for 3 days, moving steadily through the thick forest of the Pacific Northwest. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with clouds, but I wasn't worried. I've been on plenty of hikes where the weather turned sour, and I always prepared for it. My pack was loaded with the essentials: waterproof jacket, extra layers, food, a good tent, and a first aid kit. I felt confident. The map showed a main trail that would take me out by evening. But around midday, the wind picked up, strong gusts pushing through the trees. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, drenching the canopy and turning the dirt path into slippery mud. I kept moving, trying to keep my footing on the narrow trail, but the rain made it difficult to see far ahead. Then I noticed the trail markers were becoming fewer and harder to spot. The trail wasn't well maintained here. Fallen branches blocked parts of the path, and the thick brush seemed to close in on me from both sides. At one point, the main trail split, and I almost missed a faint orange ribbon tied to a small pine branch off to the right. It looked like a side trail, less obvious, but I figured it might be a shortcut or an alternate route to avoid the worst of the mud. I decided to follow it. The ribbon was old and faded, the bright orange dulled by sun and rain, but they were spaced out enough to give me some guidance. Still, the further I walked, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no insects, just the sound of rain hitting leaves and my boots squishing in the wet ground. After about 2 miles, the side trail started to get rougher. I had to push aside branches, duck under fallen logs, and climb over rocks slick with moss. The ribbons became less frequent. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of one tied around a tree or a bush, but sometimes I had to stop and look carefully to find the next one. I was starting to regret leaving the main path. The rain was soaking through my jacket and pants. My boots were caked with mud, and my legs were scratched from brambles. Then, through the trees, I saw it, a cabin. It was small, maybe the size of a single room. The wood was dark and weathered, covered in moss and dirt. There were no windows, just a single door, hanging crooked on rusty hinges. It looked abandoned, run down. The roof sagged in the middle, and vines crept up the sides. I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief because I thought I could find shelter or at least get out of the rain for a moment. Unease because it felt too quiet around the cabin, like something was off. I approached cautiously, the wet leaves crunching under my boots. I knocked on the door 3 times. No answer. The wood felt damp and cold under my knuckles. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside, it was dark and smelled like damp wood and mold. The floor was dirt, uneven and scattered with old leaves. There was just a single table and a chair, both made of rough, splintered wood. Nothing else in the room. On the far wall, something caught my eye, a Polaroid photo pin just above the table. The picture was blurry and hard to make out, but I could see a figure standing in the same cabin, staring directly at the camera. The face was impossible to see clearly, just a shadowy shape. I studied it for a long moment. The photo looked old, like it had been taken a long time ago. There was no date or writing on it. I put my pack down and sat in the chair for a moment, trying to shake off the strange feeling growing in my chest. The rain continued to tap steadily on the roof. I thought about staying here for a while, maybe until the storm passed, but the cabin felt wrong. Too empty, too quiet, like it had been waiting for someone to find it. I grabbed my pack and stepped back outside. The rain was slowing, and the sky was starting to lighten a little. I looked around to find a spot nearby to set up camp for the night. About 50 yards from the cabin, I found a small clearing. The ground was soft but mostly dry under the thick layer of pine needles. I pitched my tent quickly, hoping for a decent night's rest. I was tired, cold, and a little shaken. That night, the rain stopped. The forest grew still except for the occasional rustle of wind through the branches. I lay inside my tent, the thin fabric stretched tight above me. I had just drifted off when I heard it, knocking, soft but deliberate, like someone tapping on the side of my tent. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I waited, straining to listen. Then silence. The knocking didn't come again. I told myself it was just a branch falling or maybe an animal brushing against the tent. But I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing small noises, footsteps outside, faint and irregular. Sometimes I thought I could hear breathing. I didn't dare unzip the tent or look outside. Morning came slowly. I unzipped the tent flap and stepped out into the damp clearing. The forest looked peaceful in the soft early light. But then I noticed something strange on the ground. Muddy boot prints, fresh. They circled around the tent twice, wide and deliberate. The prints looked human, but I couldn't tell who they belonged to. They were large and heavy, and some had deep treads like work boots or hiking boots. My skin crawled. I hadn't heard any footsteps after I went to bed, and there were no other campsites nearby. I packed up my things fast, my hands shaking. I didn't want to stay another minute. I headed back the way I came, moving quickly but carefully on the muddy trail. The forest seemed darker now, and the ribbons were harder to find. When I finally reached the main trail, I broke into a run. My clothes were soaked and dirty, my boots slipping on the slick roots and rocks. I didn't stop until I was back at the trailhead, where a few cars were parked. I didn't tell anyone about the cabin or the prints. I just wanted to get home. Days later, curiosity got the better of me. I called the local ranger station and described the location of the cabin. I told them everything: the side trail marked by ribbons, the small rundown cabin with no windows, the photo inside. The ranger was quiet for a moment, then said something that sent a cold chill down my spine. No cabins out there. No old homesteads or abandoned buildings in that section of the forest. It's all protected wilderness. We patrol the area regularly, and nothing like that has ever been reported. I double-checked the maps and trail guides. Nothing showed any structure or trail matching the one I had taken. The area was supposed to be wild, untouched. No reason for an old cabin to be there. I went back, days later, determined to find the cabin again, but the side trail and ribbons were gone. No sign of any path except the main one. The forest looked exactly the same but felt different, colder, empty. I've tried to explain it logically. Maybe I took a wrong turn, maybe the cabin was some kind of temporary shelter built by someone and quickly abandoned. But the local authorities' denial made me question everything. How could I have spent hours following a trail to a place that didn't exist? I don't hike that way anymore. I stick to marked trails. The forest still calls to me, but I remember that night and the cabin with the photo, the knocking on my tent, and those muddy prints. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see that blurry picture pinned to the wall. Someone standing in that empty cabin, looking out at me, waiting. And I wonder, if I ever go back, will I find the cabin again? Or will it disappear like a trick of the forest? A place that's not meant to be found? We decided to explore a little-known trail we found on an old topo map. It was one of those lines tucked away on the edge of the forest, barely visible, unmarked on any recent map or GPS. The kind of path that looks like it hadn't been used for decades. It caught our attention because neither of us had ever been there before, and we were itching for an adventure off the beaten path. The day was clear, with the sun filtering through tall pines and birches, warming the cool spring air. The trailhead was hidden behind thick bushes and fallen logs, but we pushed through, excited to see where it would lead. The first part was slow going. The path was choked with brambles and thorny bushes. Branches scratched at our arms, and roots tangled beneath our feet, but we kept moving. We had good hiking boots and long sleeves, so the scratches were more annoying than painful. Every now and then, the trail opened up to small clearings with bright wildflowers and birdsong. We stopped a few times to catch our breath and snap some pictures, the sunlight making the forest floor shimmer with patches of green and gold. After a couple of hours, the underbrush started to thin just enough to make the trail clearer. We found old, rusty nails and bits of barbed wire half buried in the dirt, signs that people had been here before, long ago. The air grew cooler under the dense canopy, and the silence deepened, save for the occasional rustle of squirrels or the distant call of a hawk. We were both quiet, feeling the solitude of the forest pressing in around us. It wasn't the cheerful hum of a busy park or a crowded trailhead. This was the kind of silence that made you listen to your own breath and heartbeat. Eventually, we stumbled on the remains of what looked like an old stone cellar. It was half sunken into the ground, surrounded by moss-covered rocks and tangled vines. The stonework was rough but sturdy, like it had been built in the early 1900s or even earlier. The entrance was dark, about 3 feet wide and 2 feet high, just enough for a person to crawl inside. Around it lay rusted tools scattered on the ground. Shovels with broken handles, corroded saw blades, and twisted metal hooks. Shattered glass glittered in the dirt, and old leather hunting gear, cracked and dry, lay tossed in a corner. We shined our flashlights inside and saw that the cellar was a single, low-ceilinged room, maybe 10 feet deep and 8 feet wide. The floor was dirt, uneven and damp, with roots creeping through cracks in the stone walls. There were no signs of recent use, but it felt like someone had left in a hurry, or maybe had just stopped coming a long time ago. We crouched to look around, careful not to disturb the fragile bits of history. It was strangely quiet down there, colder than outside, with a faint smell of earth and old wood. While we were inside, we started hearing a soft humming. At first, it was so faint I thought it was the wind or a trick of my own ears. It sounded like someone singing under their breath, a low, steady tune that didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. I looked at my partner, who had frozen, eyes wide, listening too. The humming wasn't loud, but it felt close, like it was coming from just beyond the cellar walls or maybe even inside the forest nearby. We called out, hoping to hear a response, thinking maybe a hiker or hunter was close by. But no answer came back, only the humming continued, steady and low, with no clear source. We felt an odd chill crawl over us, not because of the cold, but because it felt wrong somehow, like being watched without seeing anyone. After a few minutes, we decided it was best to leave and keep moving. The humming faded as we crawled back out, but I swear it didn't disappear completely. We retraced our steps, expecting to find the trail again just as we'd left it. But when we reached the spot where the path had been clear, it was gone. The underbrush had swallowed it up, thick with new growth and fallen branches. No footprints, no broken twigs, no signs of any passage at all. It was as if the trail never existed. We tried pushing through the bushes, hoping to find a hint of the path, but the forest around us was dense and unyielding, with no clear direction to follow. For hours, we wandered. We moved slowly, careful not to lose our bearings completely, but the forest around us was a maze of towering trees, thick ferns, and slippery moss-covered rocks. Every direction looked the same, and every sound was muffled by the heavy foliage. The sun dropped lower, filtering through the branches in long, golden beams that barely reached the forest floor. Our water bottles were running low, and our stomachs were starting to rumble from hunger. We kept trying to find any sign of the trail or the cellar, but nothing looked familiar. There were no animal paths that seemed usable, no marks on trees or rocks to guide us. We marked some trees with bits of our clothing and broke off a few branches to leave a trail, hoping it might help us find our way back if we circled around. We stayed close to one another, taking turns leading so one could watch for any changes in the terrain or light. As the afternoon faded into evening, the temperature dropped quickly. The forest grew darker, and the shadows stretched out like fingers. We found a small ridge and climbed up, hoping to get a better view. From the top, we could see a stretch of forest rolling into the distance, but no roads, no houses, no sign of human life. Just endless green and brown stretching to the horizon. It gave us a rough idea of where we were, but not enough to figure out how to get home. We set a slow pace downhill, following the sun's direction and hoping it would lead us out. We moved carefully, aware that every step might take us deeper into the wild. The sounds of the forest changed as night fell. Nocturnal birds called, insects buzzed, and small animals rustled through the undergrowth. Our shadows danced between the trees, and our flashlights cut narrow beams through the dark. Finally, after what felt like 6 hours of walking and climbing, we saw a familiar ridgeline that matched the topo map's markings. We used it to orient ourselves, confirmed the direction of the nearest road, and made our way toward it. Our legs ached, and our faces were scratched, but relief filled us as we broke through the trees and found the dirt road that led back to civilization. We never found that cellar again, and the trail seemed to have disappeared entirely. We checked the map over and over, compared notes with local hikers and forest rangers, but no one knew about it. It was like it had been erased from the forest, swallowed by time and nature. Even now, I can't explain what happened. The humming, the vanished trail. It wasn't supernatural, just a reminder that the forest holds its secrets tightly. And sometimes, even with the best maps and plans, nature can confuse and trap you in its quiet, green depths. That day taught me to respect the wilderness more, and to always be ready for the unexpected, because sometimes the forest simply decides not to let you leave the way you came in. The day had started clear and bright. We were 4 friends, all used to hiking, but this trip was special. A multi-day loop through some remote alpine country I'd been eager to explore for years. The kind of place where the map showed little more than winding trails, thick forests, and a high mountain lake tucked into a rocky basin. We had planned carefully, carrying all the gear we'd need: tents, food, water filters, extra clothes, first aid, the usual. We were confident, maybe even a little cocky. The first couple of days went as expected. Long hikes, heavy packs, the smell of pine and damp earth everywhere. By the time we reached the lake, it was late afternoon. The sky was starting to shift from blue to a soft purple with the sun dipping behind the peaks. The lake itself was like glass, perfectly still, reflecting the craggy cliffs and scraggly pines that edged the water. There was a thin mist hanging low over the surface, but it was light and didn't feel ominous, just part of the cool evening settling in. We set up camp in a small clearing not far from the shore, the kind of spot you dream about when planning trips like this. Flat ground, sheltered from the wind by thick trees, and with a view of the water. After dinner, we sat around the small fire, the air cooling fast as night crept in. I remember feeling peaceful, tired but happy, the kind of tired that feels good. We talked quietly about the day's hike and what was ahead tomorrow. The lake's fog thickened as darkness fell, rolling in from the water like smoke. It wasn't unusual to see fog at night in the mountains, but this came fast. Suddenly, the clearing was swallowed up. The trees around us blurred into gray shadows, and the lake disappeared beneath a white curtain. Our fire's glow barely pushed back the mist. The air felt heavier, colder somehow. Around midnight, just as I was about to turn in, the screaming started. At first, I thought someone was joking. The scream was loud, sharp, like a woman screaming for help, desperate and scared. It echoed across the lake, bouncing off the cliffs, reaching us through the fog. The kind of scream that makes your blood run cold. The kind you hope you never hear when you're out in the wilderness. Then it happened again and again from different spots, sometimes from the far side of the lake, sometimes from the tree line behind us. The sound twisted and carried through the fog, impossible to locate exactly. 2 of my friends grabbed their flashlights and decided to check the area. I stayed by the fire, heart pounding, the beam of their flashlights flickering out into the mist like tiny lighthouses. They called out, hoping someone was hurt or lost, but their voices got swallowed up. I strained to listen, but only the screams answered back. The fog made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The silence between screams was almost worse. That heavy, tense quiet where you feel like you're waiting for something terrible to happen. I felt frozen, unable to move or call out. Time stretched out. Every sound seemed amplified. The crackle of the fire, the crunch of pine needles underfoot, distant rustling in the trees. But no matter how hard we searched, no one was there. Eventually, the screaming stopped. It was as sudden and strange as it had started. The forest fell completely silent again. My friends came back to camp, faces pale, voices low. None of us slept that night. The fog lingered, clinging to the trees and the lake like a wet blanket. At dawn, the fog finally lifted, and the sun broke through the clouds. We packed up quickly, eager to leave the eerie silence behind. On our way down the trail, we ran into a park ranger who was out checking the area. We told him about the screaming. He nodded slowly, almost like he expected it. He told us mountain lions can make terrifying screams that sound just like a woman in distress. But he added quietly that the area hadn't had any confirmed mountain lion sightings in years. That made the whole thing even more unsettling. If it wasn't a mountain lion, then what? The worst part was the footsteps. That night, after the screaming stopped, we all heard them. Soft, deliberate steps circling around our tents. Sometimes close, sometimes farther away, but always just beyond the thin fabric walls. Nobody dared look outside. We stayed still, clutching our flashlights and knives, eyes wide in the dark. The sounds never got louder or closer than the edge of the tree line, but they never stopped completely until dawn. One of my friends still swears he saw a figure standing just beyond the trees, motionless and watching us. He said it wasn't an animal, not a person he recognized, something else. I didn't see it, but after hearing his story, I couldn't stop picturing it in my mind every time I closed my eyes. We never went back. The memory of that night stayed with us. The screams, the fog, the footsteps outside the tents. The silence afterward felt like it was waiting for us to leave. That trip was supposed to be a simple adventure, but it left us with a reminder that the wilderness holds secrets we don't understand. And sometimes, the scariest things are the ones we never see clearly. I had planned the trip a few weeks in advance. 3 full days and 2 nights deep in the forest. Just me, my gear, and the quiet. No cell signal, no trail traffic, no noise. Exactly what I wanted. I'd been needing a break, some kind of reset. Life was getting too loud, and I figured a solo hike into the deep woods would clear my head. I picked a remote area about a 4-hour drive from home. It wasn't a park, not officially, but it had some unmarked trails and old logging roads. Not many people went out that far, which was perfect. I parked at a pull-off that barely fit my car and started walking in late morning. I had a topographic map, a compass, and a GPS that I kept turned off to save battery, only switching it on to double-check my location every couple of hours. I carried everything in a big pack: tent, sleeping bag, stove, food, extra clothes, bear spray, a headlamp, and a fixed-blade knife I'd had since college. It was early fall, cold at night but dry and pleasant during the day. The trees were starting to change color, mostly yellows and oranges. It was peaceful, and I didn't see another soul the entire first day. I hiked about 10 miles in before setting up camp near a small creek. The area had a slight incline, but the ground was mostly dry and clear. I pitched my tent on a flat spot between 2 big pines, cooked some dehydrated chili, listened to the water for a while, then crawled into my sleeping bag. The woods got dark early. I think I was asleep before 9. That first night passed without anything strange. I heard an owl a few times, maybe a branch or 2 falling somewhere in the distance, but nothing unusual. I woke up once to pee, and the stars were bright through the tree canopy. You forget how many stars there are when you live near a city. The next day, I hiked further in, maybe another 6 miles. There was no trail at this point, just old animal paths and a couple of overgrown logging roads that didn't appear to lead anywhere. I took my time, stopping often to drink water or just sit on a log and listen. Around late afternoon, I found a small clearing, just big enough for my tent. It was quiet, too quiet, really, but I chalked it up to being far from anything. No birds chirping, no bugs, just a low breeze pushing through the trees now and then. I shrugged it off. After setting up camp, I boiled water for dinner, another dehydrated meal, beef stew this time. I sat on a flat rock and ate slowly, watching the sun go down behind the trees. When it got dark, I zipped up in my tent, turned on my headlamp to read a few pages of a book I brought, and eventually dozed off. I don't know what time it was exactly, but it was dark, real dark. I woke up to a sound, soft, sharp, quick, a twig snapping. I laid still and listened. Could have been anything. A deer, maybe an elk. I've heard those before, heavy footfalls, some clumsy. This wasn't heavy. It was light, controlled, deliberate. One crack, then silence. I tried to stay calm. My heart had already picked up speed, but I told myself it was nothing. I laid there, eyes wide open in the dark, waiting. Then I heard it again. A small crunch in the leaves, maybe 20 feet from the tent. Then again, this time in a different spot, closer. It was like whatever it was had moved. Still no heavy footsteps, no breathing, just a faint rustling, then quiet, then another twig. It was circling. I didn't move. I didn't unzip the sleeping bag. I barely even breathed. I just stared into the roof of the tent and listened. My hand slowly moved toward the knife I kept beside me, and I wrapped my fingers around the handle. My other hand felt for the bear spray, but I didn't grab it just yet. I didn't want to make noise unless I had to. Another crack, this time behind my head, near the back of the tent. It was definitely circling. I suddenly shouted out, just one loud bark, "H-U-I!" Everything went dead silent. No crunch, no twig, no wind. The silence was thick, like the woods had stopped breathing. I stayed frozen, knife still in hand. I didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. Not a single sound. I stared at the ceiling of the tent for hours, waiting for something, anything to happen. I must have fallen asleep again around dawn, because I remember the faint light waking me up. When I finally stepped out of the tent, the morning air was cold and still. I looked around slowly. No sign of animals, no torn gear, no scratch marks on the tent. Nothing looked disturbed. I felt a little embarrassed for getting so worked up over maybe a raccoon or fox. Then I saw the footprints. They were about 30 feet from my tent, near a muddy patch just off the clearing. I noticed them because they looked different from deer or elk prints. I walked over and froze when I realized what they were. Bare human footprints. No tread, no shoe marks, just the shape of feet. You could see the toes, the heel, the arch. Who the hell walks around barefoot this deep in the forest? I looked around for more, found another partial print closer to a tree. Same thing. No campsite nearby, no fire pit, no trash, no broken branches where someone might have strung a tarp. Just those prints. I packed up quickly. I didn't eat breakfast, didn't even change out of my sleep clothes, just stuffed everything into the pack and started hiking back the way I came. I kept the bear spray clipped to my chest and the knife in my right hand for the first 2 miles. Every sound felt louder. Every branch that snapped under my boot made me stop and look around. A couple hours into the hike out, I started hearing something strange. Not constant, but on and off. Footsteps, or what sounded like footsteps. Every now and then, I'd hear a crunch in the leaves behind me. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked again, it would take a few seconds, then the sound would return. Just for a moment, like whoever or whatever it was had paused, waited, then moved again. I turned around dozens of times. Nothing. No movement. No shape between the trees. Nothing in my peripheral vision. I even crouched down a few times, waited 5 or 10 minutes in total silence, thinking I could maybe catch a glimpse of whatever was behind me. But there was nothing. It wasn't constant enough to be an animal. An animal would have spooked and run off. This felt intentional, like someone was following me, but didn't want to be seen. Staying just far enough back to stay hidden. Not getting too close, but close enough. By the time I reached the car, I was soaked in sweat even though the temperature hadn't broken 60. My hands were shaking. My legs were sore and stiff, but I didn't rest once. I just shoved my pack in the trunk, got in the driver's seat, and locked the doors before I even started the engine. On the drive back, I kept checking the rearview mirror like a nervous habit. I didn't really expect to see anyone, but I couldn't help it. I pulled off at a gas station about halfway home, went into the bathroom, and just sat there on the closed toilet lid for a while, trying to calm down. My body felt like it had been on alert for 10 hours straight, and I guess it had. When I got home, I didn't unpack right away. I left the gear in the car, took a long shower, and sat on the couch staring at the floor. My girlfriend at the time asked how the trip was, and I told her it was fine. Quiet. I didn't mention the footprints or the noises. Not right away. I didn't want to talk about it. Not because I thought it was supernatural or anything, but because I couldn't explain it, and that made it worse. I've done dozens of solo hikes before. I've had close calls with wildlife. I've weathered sudden storms, slipped on rocks, gotten turned around for an hour or two. But this was different. This wasn't nature. This was a person. A person walking barefoot in the woods at 2 in the morning, circling my tent without saying a word, then disappearing. That's not normal. And whoever it was, they didn't want to be found. They didn't leave any sign, just those prints. I never went back to that area. I still hike less solo though, and never that deep. I stick to places with marked trails, other people nearby. I always let someone know exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. I carry a satellite messenger now, just in case. There was no twist, no confrontation, no final reveal, just silence, a few sounds in the night, and footprints in the mud. And that's what still gets to me. Not knowing what they wanted, not knowing how close they really got, not knowing how long they watched me. I don't scare easy, but sometimes, when I'm out in the woods, I'll freeze and listen, and I swear I hear that same soft snap of a twig. And I remember how quiet the forest got after I shouted. And I remember that I never saw a face. I had done this hike a few times before. It's off a Forest Service road up in northern Arizona. Nothing too crazy, just far enough out that you're unlikely to run into anyone, especially during the week. I liked it because it wasn't a maintained trail. It was just forest, old logging cuts, animal tracks, and peace. I'd found a nice little hollow between two tall pines a few years back, maybe 3 miles in from where I usually parked. It was off the game trail by about 50 yards, tucked into a small rise that blocked wind from the north. It was perfect for hanging my hammock between the pines, cooking quietly, and just being alone. That was the plan. Just one night. Hike in, camp, relax, hike out the next morning. No big deal. I didn't tell anyone because I've done this sort of thing plenty of times before. No cell service out there, but I had my Garmin in reach and emergency contacts set up. I always keep my gear tight, lightweight, and efficient. I'm not a thrill seeker or a daredevil. I just like the quiet, and that piece of forest had always been kind to me. I parked a little before noon. It was a warm afternoon, maybe in the low 70s and dry as usual. There hadn't been rain in at least a week, so the dirt was that pale reddish dust that clings to your boots. I stepped out, stretched, checked my gear one last time, and locked up the truck. The hike in was familiar. The trail was more memory and instinct than anything else. You cross a shallow wash about a mile in, cut through some young aspen stands, then angle up a gradual slope. After about 2.5 miles, the trees open up just a bit, and you can see the western ridgeline if the light's good. That's how I always knew I was close. By the time I made camp, the sun was already dipping low. I'd taken my time, stopped once to eat some jerky and drink water, and took a picture of a neat rock formation I hadn't noticed before. The site looked the same as I remembered. A small clearing surrounded by pine and spruce, quiet except for the occasional bird call. I hung my hammock between the same two pines, unrolled my sleeping pad, and set up my little tarp overhead, just in case. I had a freeze-dried meal heating up in my jet boil, and the smell of beef stroganoff drifted up into the crisp air. Everything felt good. I didn't see or hear anything unusual, just trees, wind, and that dry forest smell. After eating, I brushed my teeth away from camp, hung my food in a dry bag on a branch about 100 feet out, and crawled into the hammock. I read for a bit using my headlamp, then shut it off and just listened. You'd be amazed at how much the forest talks at night if you pay attention. The occasional scurry of something small, a hoot from an owl, wind moving through the upper branches. Nothing alarming. I was asleep within the hour. I woke up to a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't one of those maybe I dreamed it noises. It was a sharp, violent snap like a thick branch being broken in half on purpose. Not a deadfall or wind damage, this was deliberate. My eyes snapped open and I lay frozen in my hammock. The night was pitch black. No moon. The tarp above me was useless now, and I could barely see anything. Then came the footsteps. Slow, heavy, one after another, crunching the pine needles and dry underbrush. Not a deer, not a bear. It sounded like a person walking with weight. Calm, no stumbling, not fast but with purpose. I held my breath and stayed completely still. My heart was pounding. I could feel it in my throat. Every part of me was awake and alert, locked in place like I was part of the hammock itself. The footsteps stopped. Whatever it was close, maybe 20 feet, just standing there, not moving. I strained to hear breathing, movement, anything. I thought maybe it was someone hiking through at night, maybe lost, but that didn't make sense. No one hikes out here in the dark. There's no trail to follow. And who would come out here without a flashlight? Then the voice. A man's voice. Calm, low, and close. "You shouldn't be here." That's all he said. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't angry. Sounded tired, maybe, like someone who meant it, like a statement of fact. Then silence. I didn't move, didn't even blink. I just lay there, heart racing, mouth dry, trying to make sense of it. I didn't say anything back. I didn't want to. I didn't want to be seen or heard. I didn't want him to know for sure where I was, even though he probably already knew. There was no light, no flashlight beam, no headlamp, just the voice in the dark, the silence afterward, and then the slow, steady footsteps moving away. Not rushing, not panicked, just the same heavy pace, fading out deeper into the forest. I stayed awake the rest of the night. I didn't even shift in the hammock. I was locked up tight, my muscles sore by morning just from being tense for so long. I didn't hear anything else. No animals, no branches breaking, just wind through the pines, soft and cold. When the first light started to rise in the east, I finally moved. I sat up slowly, listening, then stood and looked around. Everything was still, just forest. I checked the ground but couldn't see any clear footprints. The ground out there doesn't always hold impressions unless it's muddy, and it had been dry for days. Still, I didn't linger. I packed my hammock, took down the tarp, rolled my sleeping pad, and stuffed everything into my pack with quick, practiced movements. I walked out the same way I came in, stopping only once to grab my food bag. I kept looking behind me, every few minutes, trying to see if someone was there, but there was no one. The forest looked the same, too much the same. The air felt thicker somehow, heavier. I didn't feel watched exactly, but I didn't feel alone either. The hike out took less time. I didn't stop. I didn't eat or drink. I just moved, step after step, all the way back to the truck. When I got there, I half expected to see something, anything, messed with. A slashed tire, a broken window, something left on the hood. But everything was the way I left it. I unlocked the door, got in, and started the engine without even brushing off the dust. I didn't relax until I hit the pavement again. Something about getting back to a real road, with signs and lines and other cars, finally let my shoulders drop. But the whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about that voice, that sound, the way he said it. He didn't sound threatening, but he didn't sound kind either. He just meant it. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he was doing out there, that deep into the woods, in the middle of the night with no light. And honestly, I don't want to know. Maybe he lives out there. Maybe he camps full-time, off-grid. Maybe it was something more sinister. I can guess all I want, but none of it changes how I felt in that moment. I haven't been back to that spot since. I still hike and I still camp, but I don't go out alone like that anymore. Not that far out. Not without a friend, at least. It's not fear exactly. It's more like respect. Like the forest showed me its edge that night. A reminder that even if I think I know a place, I don't really own any of it. I did everything right that night. Hung my food, cleaned up, stayed quiet, stuck to a familiar spot, and still, something I didn't expect found me, spoke to me, watched me. The forest is big and old and full of things we pass by without noticing. People, animals, lives we never see. Most of the time, we don't cross paths, but sometimes we do. And when that happens, you listen. You pack your things and you leave, and you don't go back.